Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Luis Herrera. I'm the head of sales for Latin America at Procore. Today we have Humberto Donato and Monica Serrano. Humberto is joining us from DD Group from Puerto Rico, and Monica Serrano is joining us from Turner. The idea today is to have a discussion that we've been very excited about. Is a discussion on sustainable design and construction and the challenges and opportunities we have from a Latin American perspective. We're all Latin American. We've been in this market for a while, so we want to have this open discussion and have the perspective from two very important guests that we have today. If you don't mind, Monica, giving us a little more context on what Turner does, and obviously also Humberto once Monica finishes.
Sure.
Sure. So Turner is a North American-based international construction services company and a leading builder in diverse market segments. Our company has earned recognition for undertaking large, complex projects, fostering innovation, embracing emerging technologies, and making difference for our clients, employees, and our communities. We also have been named the #1 greenest contractor per the Engineering News Record for the last 12 years.
Thank you so much, Monica. Humberto, if you don't mind giving us a little more context on what.
Sure, glad to. DDD Group is located in San Juan, Puerto Rico. We've been in business for a little bit over 2 decades, 23 years now. We are committed to designing, building, and maintaining high-quality, sustainable, and cost-effective projects for both the federal marketplace and the private and public sectors here in Puerto Rico. We work with collaborative team environment using the latest technology and using innovative management techniques to improve productivity, reduce costs, and provide clients with the best project possible.
Excellent. Thank you so much, both, for giving us a little more context on what the companies you represent do. We obviously have a number of questions. I think it's going to be a very engaging and interesting conversation. I think the first one that is in a lot of people's minds right now is, what is sustainable construction and why is it important from your perspective? If you don't mind, Monica starting, and then Humberto as well.
Yeah, sure. So we define sustainable construction as construction that has a low impact to the environment as compared to the standard common practices until now. The reason why sustainable construction is relevant is because our climate has changed, it's changing. Our future will not be like the past. We're already suffering the consequences of climate change. Our weather patterns are different. Extreme weather events like hurricanes and wildfires are more common. They're happening as we speak. Global average temperatures are higher, and that is just a trend that is not going to change. So we're at a point in history where we can both adapt for the future and reduce our greenhouse gases emissions so our planet doesn't become unlivable.
Absolutely. No, that's great. Thank you.
Yes.
Humberto, if you can give us a little bit of insight on it.
Sure. Building on what Monica said, and talking a little bit about what the perspective is out there regarding sustainable construction. There's a lot of focus on the environmental factors, on the benefits to the environment. But like Monica mentioned, there are other benefits that are equally important that many people are not conscious about. And I want to focus on 3 factors that I believe are really important, and some of them, most people might know, some they might not realize. The first one, which Monica touched on, was communities and equity. And from a Latin American perspective, here in Puerto Rico, and I know that in many other Latin American countries in Central and South America, there's a lot of disparity in different communities, and there are certain areas that are a lot more exposed to the differences and the climate change. And sustainable design and construction provides the groundwork and tools to improve the quality of life. And you'll ask, why are we, what do you mean improving the quality of life? But in reality, part of what sustainable design does is make sure that the facilities we design and the communities we design provide a better environment for those inhabitants. By improving daylight, using daylight, increasing natural ventilation, providing views, those strategies, more than theoretical, do improve and affect the perception and how people live and how people use those spaces. Also, from the Puerto Rico perspective, infrastructure droughts, electrical. Here in Puerto Rico is a very mountainous island, like it is in many other places in Latin America. And there are areas that do not have the access to the basic infrastructure, to the basic utilities. Sustainable design using sustainable design and construction strategies provides access to infrastructure for the poorest of the poor in areas where they might not be able to have access to those utilities.
What are the challenges of sustainable design in construction from your experience in particular? If you don't mind, Humberto, starting this time.
Sure. There's a lot of challenges, and most of them begin with the lack of awareness, with education. Being part of the AGC National, the General Contractors Association, and being part of the AIA and AGC Joint Committee, I've been able to get myself involved in helping educate the industry, because the lack of awareness has delayed the progress of the implementation of a lot of sustainability measures that have incredible benefits for communities. We have to make people understand that sustainable design is not only good for the environment, but it's also good for the bottom line of all the parties involved. In my perspective, the lack of awareness, for example, in a practical term, comes from an approach that is more prescriptive. People will actually read a set of requirements from the Green Building Council or any other approval certification entity, and use those as basically a list, that immovable list that to be applied in a project. Usually when you have that prescriptive approach versus an analytical approach, the construction costs tend to be a lot higher. And people don't realize that what you're looking for is return on investment. The different systems for certifying buildings provide for analytical approaches that permit teams, design and construction teams, to focus on areas that have the greater benefit to the parties involved, with lower utility bills, lower construction costs, lower material costs, greater efficiencies. And it has been our experience that when you do that, the investment required to develop or design and build a sustainable project is not that different from the initial investment. So that brings me to the second point: costs. People perceive that sustainable construction has to be expensive, and it doesn't have to. If it's done right, if it's done with a focus on specific items that greater benefit the project, sustainable construction can actually have lower costs, not only at certain stages in construction, but during the lifetime of the project. So that's another challenge: the perception versus reality in terms of costs. And finally, I think a big challenge, and people have been able to understand the importance, is in planning and the analytical process that's required to help get these projects going, to lower those costs, to create that awareness. A lot of you might know what IPD is, which is Integrated Project Delivery. Some of you might not. But basically what IPD is critical, it's super important in doing sustainable design and construction, because it helps teams plan and work together from the very early stages of a project to align common interests and help the bottom line. And that might sound beautiful and theoretical, but it does work. I'll tell you, we've done it for a long time, and there's amazing benefits in incorporating integrated project delivery practices, which basically try to have all the team players very early on understand the common goals and work together. And that makes a huge difference. So those three things: lack of awareness, costs, planning, and analytical process, to me, are some of the greatest challenges.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on that answer, because I agree. I agree with everything that Humberto has said. And working, collaborating with all parties involved is key. Not only the client, but the designers, the architects, the contractor, and the building user, right? Because you can build a sustainable building, but if it's not used correctly, it's not going to operate sustainably. And other challenges that I'll add to that, challenges also that depend on the region, right? And who's building the building, the type of building that we're building. A hospital will have different needs than an office building. But in general, I see three challenges. We have built the same way for a long time. And this is, related to what Humberto said on changing our perspective, right? And slight changes take place, of course, but when LEED buildings were around, that was when they arrived, that was significant change. And it took some time to embrace it. Change is difficult, right? Just changing our ways. We had stayed on our ways, we revert often to what we were doing. So changing the way we think about buildings, constructions, the spaces, what the spaces are used for, and how they affect us takes time. Now, climate disasters are happening more often, and it's perhaps easier to understand the need for a sustainable and a resilient building. But then we run into challenge number two that Humberto alluded to, and it's the cost, or perhaps the concept that a sustainable building is going to be more expensive. Again, with planning, with collaboration from early on, doing life cycle analysis, it is sometimes a sustainable building may be slightly more expensive day one, but in the long run, it saves money because operational costs will be lower. On a similar note, if you're building a building that resists disasters, that operations don't have to stop when a crisis occurs, you won't have to rebuild after a hurricane or an extreme wind hits a building. So you're saving on resources that you would otherwise have to purchase, install, if you're rebuilding the building. And there's also diminishing operation interruptions. That's also money. If a building is down, it's money that the client or the owner or the tenant is losing because they can't operate. Another challenge I see is it's codes. Building codes. So some codes have evolved for the better through time, and some codes in some locations include sustainable and resilient designs. Example of these are California seismic codes. And for instance, in Miami-Dade County, the codes have been updated to mitigate high-speed winds. But in many areas, we only have sustainable and resiliency guidelines, not codes. So the challenge is convincing owners and developers to not build to the minimum code. Codes were really designed to be a minimum standard, and it's important to know that you can build above code and find many benefits from that.
So going back to the conversation and obviously what you guys are seeing in the Latin American market and from a Latin American perspective, which is where we are right now, what are the most recent trends around sustainable construction you guys have seen over the last couple of years, if you want to say that? If you can start, Monica, it would be great.
Sure. So I see, LEED is definitely becoming more common. And we're even seeing more certifications than just LEED. I'm sure it'll take some time to, become as common as LEED is. But I do see a focus in certifications that make the occupant health and well-being a priority. Something that I'm seeing more of is also buildings that are built to a certification without getting the certification. So think of buildings that are net zero building ready. That's another trend that I'm seeing. As I mentioned before, I mentioned embodied carbon. That's another conversation that is becoming more and more common. And it makes sense, as I mentioned before, about approximately 25% of a carbon in a building is emitted by the time a brand new building opens in stores. And as we build more buildings that are efficient, that their operations are efficient, then that embodied carbon is going to be even higher. Fun fact, cement, fun and sad at the same time, cement in concrete, if it was a country, it would be the third emitter in the world, right? So cement production and concrete production is extremely, it affects greenhouse gases emissions drastically. And there's some movement in California, which, usually kind of starts the environmental movements in the United States and just kind of trickles down to Latin America. And in California, it is now a law that state buildings track their embodied carbon for three materials: steel, glass and insulation. Concrete lobbyists did a very good job about staying out of that conversation, but it's basically a sign that embodied carbon is coming along. I'm not sure how quickly, but the conversation is definitely getting started and here to stay. In the last conversation I have seen starting to become more and more common, and it's a drastic change from embodied carbon and certifications, it's insurance. And insurance is more related to the resiliency and resilient buildings. And I just quickly what I define a resilient building is a building that is able to withstand and recover quickly in the face of a crisis or a natural disaster. And resilient buildings, depending on where they're located, depending on the vulnerability, could it be wildfires or floods or winds, buildings can have resilient features. So you can have flood walls, or you can have a sacrificial space that can flood and then drain and continue operations. A resilient building in Mexico City will be better at withstanding earthquakes, right? Whereas perhaps in California, I'll have a landscaping that can mitigate fires. So that being said, insurance companies are paying off more than ever in losses related to extreme weather events. And they're starting to question more the risk of a building in a certain location.
Excellent. Thank you, Monica. Humberto, let us know.
There's so much to talk about, and to me, and I'm sure to the rest of the panel, this is such an exciting topic that we could talk forever. But talking about the recent trends, it's probably one of the topics regarding sustainable design and construction that excites me the most. People think about technology, which is key for the process that we're talking about, as mostly software, but really technology incorporates a lot more than that. It incorporates process, materials, tools, and some of the trends that have been affecting that really make a difference are move around technology. Technology is an enabler of transparency. Transparency permits collaboration, and collaboration helps to reach or achieve the goals that we want to achieve with a sustainable building. Here at our company, DDD, we've been incorporating a lot of VDC, virtual design and construction techniques. Virtual design and construction is an amazing process that has been growing out of all of these other areas and out of building information modeling, but basically it's a process that allows contractors and designers to have a second shot at building a building. You have a first shot at building something virtually to clean up the process, make sure that you get all the kinks out, and that saves time and saves money. And also that process with the different tools that are out there helps increase quality and safety. A lot of that goes around building information modeling. And building information modeling is critical in the sustainable process, both in the sustainable design and the sustainable construction. A lot of the projects that we work for the federal government, for Homeland Security, GSA, the US Army, the US Corps of Engineers, and a lot of private owners are required, and it's part of the process to start modeling very early on with building information modeling that includes building energy modeling, what it's called BEM, B-E-M. And that using that technology to analyze very early on at the conceptual stage what the goals are, what the building can achieve, being able to make decisions that are so easy to do when you're in the concept phase is an amazing tool that really makes a difference. And there are a lot of tools out there for building information modeling. We use here at DDD Graphisoft's modeling tools and Solibri for coordination. And we do energy modeling with the same tools. And that also helps and serves as the foundation for something I mentioned before, transparency. And so those tools help to enable an integrated process, integrated practices, and enable collaboration. Really communication and project management tools like Procore and various others help enable that communication. And communication and education are key. I think we've mentioned it before. So technology becomes a facilitator for transparency. So by using technology, virtual design and construction, building information modeling tools, energy modeling, and integrating that into lean, efficient, collaborative process with integrated project delivery enables teams to really get the most out of these sustainability strategies and goals that we have. So those three things I think are really exciting trends in sustainable construction: virtual design, building information modeling and building energy modeling, and the process, integrated practices, technology, and collaboration tools.
Can you share some stories about sustainable construction from Turner and DDD Group? And Humberto, if you can kick us off on what you've seen in the past and let us know a little more about this.
Yeah, we have a lot of stories, but there's this one story that I think is really makes the point to what we're talking about. And it's a project that we built a couple of years ago. We were the sustainability consultant and the general contractor for Ciudad Lumen Phase 1. It's an 11-story, 140-unit, low-income, subsidized housing project, Section 8 project. That building was the first green certified low-income housing project with low-income tax credits here in Puerto Rico under a local green permit called Permiso Verde. And it was the first project to achieve that certification. But the story with Ciudad Lumen is, it's amazing, because right in the middle, the project started and the client said, no, this is a low-income housing. We have a very limited budget. We cannot do green. HUD and the Housing Administration is forcing us to do green, but we don't have the budget for that. But the reality was, when we did the analysis, we were able to incorporate and certify the project with 300. This is a $15 million project, and the changes that were required to certify the project only created a $300,000 increase on that project, with a much greater amount of benefits to the building. And then, so we started building the project. Right in the middle of the project, Hurricane Maria hits us. The building started facing a lot of the problems that we were talking about. And the strategies that we used, thank God, helped the building not only survive that hurricane, but also helped our firm be able to continue construction within a month. And we were able to deliver that project on time, on budget, and complying with the goals that we had set out for that project. The project realized 35% savings in energy use, and we used some basic strategies that we thought were going to create the greatest amount of return on investment. And this goes back to what I talked about a little bit earlier. We said, so where do we put our money? Where do we get our points, to certify the building? But where do we want to put the money that we get the most benefit on? We used solar panels. We used the whole roof. So all of the common areas of the building are fed using solar energy. We also incorporated LED fixtures, lighting controls, and used low emission fenestration throughout the building. So the use of renewable energy and certain adjustments in the architecture basically permitted the building to be a lot greener, if you can say that way, but really save the client a lot of money and comply with the requirements that the housing administration was setting out for projects like this. So this is a great success study, not only success story, not only in terms of sustainability, but also in terms of resiliency, with a low-income project that was able to succeed with sustainability measures at a very low cost and a very high return on investment.
Excellent. Thank you, Humberto. Monica, any stories that you want to share with us?
Yes. So I wanted to share the story of Kimmel Hospital, which is a hospital that we built for a client, Langone Health. It's in New York City. It's by the East River, so the east side of Manhattan. And this building, it has over 300, I believe it has like 370 patient rooms. And because of the vulnerable location, it was built after Sandy. So I think Sandy was a big wake-up call to folks in Manhattan and New York overall. So this building has emergency power system for not only the hospital, but also two other buildings, because there's a whole array of buildings next to each other, part of this hospital system. It has a cogeneration plant that serves the whole campus steam and electrical loads. Within the hospital, patient data, and most controls are digitized. In fact, there's now that we talk about, how the building is operated is also important. There are robots going around the hospital, making sure that supplies like towels and medicines are replenished, which is something just interesting and strange and weird at the same time. The building is surrounded by a barrier that is deployed to prevent flooding. So the building itself has like 10 different types of flood barriers and flood gates. Some of the gates are used normally in submarines, but I think this is a trend that I think we'll see more and more often. When a storm is expected to cause a surge, workers will unlock this barricades, and there is another one that actually, when it fills with water, then it's a hydraulic flow barrier that lifts as water goes into the bottom. It has like a channel in the bottom, and eventually all this hospital will be surrounded by flood walls, kind of like a fortress. The hospital is designed to accommodate folks coming in a moment of a disaster or crisis, because when this crisis happened, people need to go different locations. Like when there's wildfires and people need to evacuate, where do they evacuate to? If there's a flood, it's often, people are hurt, or they need to go to a hospital, or they need help, and this building can accommodate extra occupants. Other sustainable features that it has is that this is a simple one, but we should use them more often, is vestibules that protect hallways from contagious patients. This would apply to the situation that we're living in now, COVID. There's also e-glass that turns opaque on demand, providing both privacy, and it's just easier to sanitize them than curtains. During the construction site, the bathrooms were prefabricated and installed. They all look very similar, which decreases the error in using them and cleaning them. I think those are all the sustainable features that I can think of. A fun fact about this building is that because of its location, it kind of straddles Amtrak. Amtrak is the train tunnels and sewer outflow. So that was a cool design challenge, right? Building over this. But anyway, this hospital is really, it's a great example of, and it's really pretty, as this the pictures look. It's very pretty, it's very attractive. I think also on the topic that we're talking about, healthy buildings that can benefit the occupants, the look of a building, the feel of a building, incorporating natural light and making the building look more like including biophilia, which means it's basically, we were designed to be in nature, right? So we have to bring elements from nature into the building to benefit the health and the well-being of the occupant. And this is something that this hospital also did.
Wow, excellent stories. So going back to, let's talk a little bit about what you mentioned, Humberto. So we have, this phrase very well, lo barato sale caro, like that cheap becomes expensive. That's exactly what the misconception of green building is, right? So, let's keep it simple, let's keep it cheap now, and then don't worry about the future. That's starting to change. Obviously, on the trends that you guys are talking about, we have to be on top of that as we move along on the future of construction, right? So that's extremely important to hear the story from the Puerto Rico side, which I am really glad you guys were able to prove that there is a better way to do things. And then on your side, Monica, when you were talking about this, and I know exactly the area where you're talking about in New Jersey, that's where you mentioned, New Jersey, where the
New York. So the building is in New York. It's the east side of Manhattan. Yeah, by East River.
Gotcha. So it's very interesting that all these features, right? Like if you think about how like US is doing things and how we're actually from that Latin American perspective, kind of moving towards that direction, it takes us a little time, but we're catching up fast. And that's very important to recognize that the efforts of companies all over the world, not just in the US, but not just in Puerto Rico, are trying to get to a better level in talking about the codes and the mentioning of that a minute ago. So thank you for that. I think that was a great set of stories, a couple of stories that you guys gave us. So I think we're kind of getting to the end of the session. I wanted to, first of all, thank you guys for the time. This is extremely educational. I think that if I can rescue a word out of all this, is education. I think we're all going through an education, and the world is learning that there are always better ways to build. I'm very excited to continue these conversations. I'm sure I'm going to be pinging you guys in the future to talk about this as well. We're very excited to have you guys again here, and looking forward to the next session. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Humberto, for the time and your knowledge.